Good afternoon. Bon après-midi.
Good afternoon. I will now open our meeting. I called meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 6 of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the State of Persons with Disabilities.
September the 18th, 2025, the committee is meeting on youth employment in Canada. Madame Gill, is the interpretation?
Non, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais tout simplement savoir si les tests techniques ont pu être effectués auprès des témoins. Merci.
No, I'm not getting it.
I just want to know whether or not the requisite tests were done with the witnesses beforehand.
Oh, excuse. Yes. Pursuant to the motion adopted on Thursday, September the 18th, 2025, the committee is meeting on youth employment in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are appearing in the room and are appearing virtually. Before we begin, I will just ask you to follow some of the guidelines. There is a card in front of you that gives you some instructions. They are primarily make sure your devices are muted or put on silence mode, as well as please refrain from touching the boom on the mic when you're speaking because it can cause popping. Pardon?
Excuse, Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, appel au règlement. Je n'ai pas.
On a point of order, I'm sorry, I don't have any French interpretation.
Un moment.
C'est bon.
Just a moment, please.
C'est bien français. OK, c'est bon.
Hello?
Merci.
Madame Gill?
Oui.
Is it translating now? Is it translating now?
Non, habituellement, j'entends pas.
I don't hear anything.
Anglais.
I'm hearing the English only.
Check if she's on the right.
Oui, je suis en français. OK?
Hello, hello, hello. Yes. Good, good. Madame Gill, en français?
Madame Gill, can you hear the French interpretation now? The English.
Thank you.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Encore une fois.
Yes, and the instructions on making sure that your devices are muted, silenced while in the committee, and please refrain from touching the mic because it can cause issues for our interpreters. Some general comments. I would like to remind participants at the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, please use the raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you want to get my attention. As well, those that participating virtually, you can choose to participate in the official language of your choice by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your service and choosing the language you wish to participate in. Again, as you've seen, if there is issues with translation, please get my attention. We'll suspend while they're corrected. And before we move into our witnesses, there's just one housekeeping matter that I wish to address with the committee before we begin. The clerk circulated a press release for this study. Would members like to adopt the press release as circulated? We did not receive any feedback back. I'm seeing consensus, so clerk, the press release can be circulated as can be released as it was circulated. We also have to approve a budget of $58,500 for this particular study. It covers all our hearings and the report process. Do I have the adoption of the study budget? Seeing consensus, the budget is approved. So we will now move to the formal part of the meeting. I would like to welcome our witness, and we are going with one 2-hour panel today with 5 witnesses, beginning with Axiom Group Incorporated, Perry Rizzo, President Chief Executive Officer. From the Community Economic Development and Employment Corporation, John Buck, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, Alexandra Gagnon, Vice President, Public Affairs, Labor and Regional Vitality. Stéphane Pagot, Senior Advisor, Labor and Public Affairs. Réseau des Carrefour Jeunesse Employed de Québec, Ruby Humford in the room, President, Chief Executive Officer. And Treasure Mills Incorporated, Robert Johnson, President. Each presenter, you will have 5 minutes to give your opening comments, and then we'll proceed to the questioning process. So as you get close to your 5, I'd ask you to wrap up, or when you see my hand, I'm expecting you to wrap up quickly. So we'll start with Axiom Group Incorporated, Mr. Rizzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for inviting me to be an important witness here for this issue. So Axiom Group was formed in 1987. We're a Canadian-owned company, and we were located in a suburb of Toronto, Scarborough, Ontario. And through hard work and many years, we've grown the company to over $200 million with facilities in Canada, U.S., and Mexico. We employ in excess of 650 to 700 employees globally. And this is probably the most important subject matter that I've come across in a long time. So I'm devoting some time. I've made some notes. So I want to get right into it. Addressing the root cause of low unemployment. Canada's employment problem is not temporary. It's structural. A decade of declining productivity has left businesses less competitive, reducing our ability and willingness to create jobs. Unless we reverse this productivity decline, job growth will remain stagnant. The importance of job creation. Job creation. I don't want to hear about housing. I don't want to hear about other issues. I want to hear about jobs, 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 and more jobs. Job creation is the singularly most important aspect of our economy, and we need to get serious about creating jobs. But the environment, the business risks, the low investments in Canada, why is it happening? Well, low risks for banking mandates, very little support from the banks in Canada, restrict access to growth and capital, high taxation and an uncompetitive situation and operating costs erodes our returns on investment. The layered federal, provincial, and municipal policies create a high cost of environment and discourages expansion. The result is fewer opportunities for Canadian workers and a weaker economy overall. Challenges for the Canadian entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs face diminishing incentives to innovate, to hire, and to expand. Our socioeconomic policies and regulations are eroding competitiveness, leaving Canadian business owners questioning the payoff and why we take our risks. When risk-taking is punished and not rewarded, job creation stalls. The impact of social policies and work incentives. Current policies often reward non-productive and disincentivize work, right? We have to stop those types of policies, right? Hardworking Canadians should be rewarded, right? Who strive to succeed, who strive to create jobs, who strive to create a better Canada and contribute to the overall success. Burdened with high tax of contributing and will face fewer consequences. The imbalance creates a culture where
Mr. Rizzo, we're losing you from time to time.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, comparison with the United States. In the United States, entrepreneurs are rewarded and workers see clear rewards for effort, higher returns, lower taxes, stronger incentives, and greater support for investment. In Canada, higher taxation, rigid policies, and limited paybacks create and discourage both entrepreneurship and capital investment. The result, talent and investment flow south, while Canada lags further behind. Canada's competitive landscape. Canada's economy is hampered by systematic barriers, oligopolies, large government employment ratios to private sector, heavily unionized markets, uncompetitive tax structures, all combine to make Canada one of the lowest productive countries in the world and continues to lose our rank on productivity overall. Research includes reports from the University of British Columbia, which I have, confirms that the government-driven policies have eroded Canada's competitiveness globally. The need for long-term strategic planning, irrespective of political stripe. Canada is operating with a long-term economic strategy. Canada really needs to develop a strategy that transcends one political term, in my opinion. A 5-year term, it doesn't matter. What's important to Canada is that there's core objectives that should be clearly identified by the parties, and it should last for the next 10, 15, 25 years for long-term investment. So Canada is operating without a long-term economic strategy. The short-term political priorities and fragmented socioeconomic policies have replaced coherent planning. Without a strategic vision, productivity will continue to decline as investment will dry up. Those are my opening statements. I have additional information that I'm willing to share or answer during questions, but Canada needs a long-term strategic plan. I've gone through many economic cycles since we started the company in 1987. I faced many, many challenges, but I believe the last 10, 15 years, the last 10 years has been extremely, extremely concerning. When other CEOs that I talk to feel demotivated, and our lead not going to help job creation and job growth. We're tired of feeling like we are some type of the problem. You know, I work 16-hour days from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. A 12-hour day is normal for me, plus Saturdays and Sundays if necessary. Waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and driving to meetings is normal. We work hard to create jobs and employment. We risk a tremendous amount of time, effort, and human capital and financial capital to develop new innovations and technologies for Canada with limited investment or limited contribution from all levels of government.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. You've gone over, and I would just, if you could just stay positioned because we are losing you from time to time. Voice connection.
Okay, is the micro?
Yeah,
okay.
It's fine now. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Mr. Buck for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to contribute to this critical study on youth employment. My name is John Buck, President and CEO of the Community Economic Development and Employability Corporation. Our mandate is to strengthen the economic vitality of the official language minority community in Quebec. While my focus today is on this official language minority community in Quebec, I think the challenge we face and the solutions we are advancing have clear relevance for youth across Canada. English-speaking youth in Quebec represent 256,835 individuals aged 15 to 29. They make up 20.5% of the English-speaking population, compared with 16.3% for Francophones. English-speaking youth are younger, more diverse. 43% identify as visible minorities, compared with 17% of Francophone youth. Statistics point to serious youth employment challenges. Employment rate is 56.1% for English-speaking youth, nearly 6 points lower than Francophones. Unemployment rate, 14.4% compared to 9% for Francophones. Educational attainment, nearly half, or 49.6%, have only a high school education or less. English-speaking youth consistently lag their Francophone peers in vocational and technical training. These figures point to a concerning trend in school-to-work transitions. Many youth leave education without market-ready skills, take longer to secure meaningful work, or are underemployed in part-time or unstable jobs. The 2024 Deloitte Failure to Launch report, commissioned by the King's Trust Canada, reminds us of the wage, tax revenue, and long-term productivity losses this situation represents. The challenges are significant. Skills mismatches between what schools provide and what employers need, weaker job networks for English-speaking youth to connect with the labour market, and regional disparities, where in places like Gaspésie or Nord du Québec, unemployment for English-speaking youth is far above the provincial average. At SADC, we are taking a coordinated action on 3 fronts. First, in applied research. SADC has launched a comparative international study of best practices in linking education and training to labour market demand. We are examining models in Canada, the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Scandinavia. We will release preliminary findings this November and share them with the Government of Canada. And I would be pleased to provide them to this committee. The findings will inform our workforce development strategy. However, lessons learned will extend beyond Quebec, as issues such as underemployment, skills mismatches, and challenging school-to-work transitions are common across provinces. Secondly, we are developing the Collaborative Economic Development Ecosystem. This community-based mechanism brings together public, private, and civil society actors dedicated to strengthening workforce development and labour market participation. Key objectives include better connecting job seekers, training institutions, and employers, enhancing collaboration and collective accountability to produce job placements, lower unemployment, and higher incomes, and improving labour market intelligence so youth, educators, and employers make better decisions. And finally, practical implementation. SADC is about to roll out the Employment Assistance Services Capacity Development Initiative, the EAS-CDI. The EAS-CDI links a coordinated continuum of employment assistance service providers across the province. It embeds timely labour market information, an AI-based provincial talent placement platform, and a robust performance measurement framework that ties all of our work to producing tangible outcomes. For youth, this means better access to career pathways, stronger employer connections, and services that help them not only to find a job, but also build sustainable careers in Quebec. In closing, I wish to underline 3 points. Labour market outcomes for English-speaking youth lag significantly behind their Francophone peers in Quebec. Inaction means lost income, productivity, and weaker social cohesion. And SADC is applying innovative, evidence-based solutions through research, ecosystem development, and the deployment of the EAS-CDI. By linking workforce development directly to labour market participation, we can ensure that English-speaking youth get good jobs, build future-oriented careers, and fully contribute to our shared economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. From the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce, Alexandre Gagnon. Monsieur Gagnon.
Mr. Gagnon? Yes, thank you. I'm accompanied by my colleague Stéphane Pajot, who will be speaking. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting us to the committee. I am Stéphane Pajot, a senior advisor, and I'm accompanied by Alexandre Gagnon. We represent some 1,000 people and some 45,000 businesses in all the sectors of the economy in Quebec. Unemployment is a concern for our association, and it is one of the main sources of concern and vacant positions in Quebec. Of course, you have to take into account mobility. That's part of the equation with respect to those employees that are available and where they are. But our association is somewhat different from what exists elsewhere in Canada. We have 1%. Our percentage of unemployment in Quebec is lower than elsewhere in Canada. It's 9.1 in Quebec, some 14 plus in the rest of Canada. So we are more or less within the mean average. From 2005, it was 14.1. 5 years following, it dropped down to 10.5, and now the present level in comparison with the OECD figures for 15 to 25 age group. We have students, and we look at unemployment in students. That represents 1.6%, 0.2% for non-students men, 3% versus 0.3% for women. It is a concern for men, of course, and that leads us to ask questions about their education and what they are being taught. As you know, the rise in unemployment and economic perspectives and prospects at the present time mean that young people are harder hit in terms of finding a job rather than if there were a normal situation, globally speaking. We compare that to what exists in Quebec. What statistics we have in Quebec indicate that youth is more vulnerable in terms of the positions they have. And when they have a position, it's an entry-level position. In Quebec, they work in retail, 51.7%, restaurant, hospitality, housing, and so on. And the jobs that are available to secondary school students or university students, inaudible to the interpreter. And there is a cause for this. It's a cause and effect situation. First of all, there is a fundamental difference between the rate of unemployment we have in Quebec, 3.6% in Marchand de Galache and 2.6% in Gaspé. So more than half of Quebec represents a 4.6% unemployment rate. 85% of the jobs are full-time jobs. 60% of them require a degree from a college, which is not the case of many students who are looking for a job. There is a resulting drop in productivity. And very often there is a drop in productivity, as I have said. But on the longer term, we have to ask ourselves some questions. 1.4 million jobs overall, 203,000 in Quebec. So will there be enough jobs available for the people who seek them? I only have 30 seconds left. First of all, I guess I should say young people are seeking jobs. Something has to be done. We have to be able to look at the short-term problem. We have to, as well, look at the Quebec industries in terms of productivity. And on the longer term, we want to have a fair vision for all areas. I thank you for your attention, and I'll pass the. Thank you so much, Mr. Pajot. We will ask the Réseau de Carrefour Jeunesse, Mr. Humbert, to speak now. Chair, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. We are involved in a perfect storm for young people. There is a technological revolution that is ongoing, and we have policies, in addition to the trade war, and also we have policies that are poorly adapted to that. Young people are suffering socially. They face obstacles that are educational, that are social, that are economic. Our message is very clear. We can answer, but we must not just answer the challenge that young people are facing only in terms of percentages. Young people are in a fragile position, and this will have an effect on social cohesion and the social fabric itself. There is a doubling and a tripling of the national rate amongst youth unemployment, and there is an 85% loss of jobs. 10,000 young people are coming out of school with no prospect of finding a job. And we see young people in the streets without any prospects. You look at their faces and you know that something is very wrong. How can you engage these young people in the labor force? Our project is based on founding a future for young people. It is based on 3 pillars. Universality is one of those pillars. We want to help young people fight against discrimination, build their ability to find a job, and finally, dignity is part of it as well. In 2025, we cannot close our eyes to this serious unemployment problem amongst youth. Fewer and fewer young people are being hired. They lack experience, so how can they pursue their career? Young people from 15 to 24 years of age in Quebec are in a very vulnerable position, particularly with respect to AI and automation. On the one hand, there will certainly be the automation of various repetitive tasks. They will be taken over by AI, but we have to think of critical analysis, human management, and other areas where humans cannot be replaced. And this will be the future for young people. They will need to have access to education and upskilling. This is a moment of social transition, and there must be training made available to young people. And we also have to support the employers who, without putting the accent on inequalities, we want to be able to establish a fair basis for the increase in productivity. We do not want to accelerate social polarization. If we want to improve the quality of life by funding training for young people, it could bring us closer to shared prosperity. There is a need in Canada and Quebec in the labour force of a major restructuring. It will be efficient and necessary for young people. There has to be a democratic approach to that. We don't want to have narrow eligibility processes or criteria. We have to be able to help them adapt to the changing reality of today. We have to deal with agreements, not just on a simple administrative basis, but by taking into consideration the needs of youth. The development of the labour market it has to be assured for the future so that it has a maximum impact for youth and a minimum deterioration in the area of democracy. We are at a crossroads now. We need to ensure that there is a safety net for young people and that we are able to provide jobs for them. We do so by providing pilot projects that will lead them to employment. We have to include the perspective of youth in the general policies that we enact to be able to provide this type of security. To conclude, young people have to be able to think about and believe in their future. Unemployment is a collective challenge. We have to be coordinated, ambitious, and we have to work together in a strong partnership that will allow for an educational and economic turnaround here. This is something that is important for the federal government. We want to work with associations and with Parliament to build a better future for our youth. And I thank you for listening to my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Humbert.
Mr. Johnson from Treasure Mills Incorporated for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you for inviting me to the committee. I think, and I haven't taken the same time that everyone else has taken with regards to preparing a 5-minute speech and with regards to all the various details. But what I can tell you is that I'm an owner of a company called Treasure Mills. We're in the bakery business. We make kid snack foods. We're located in Aurora, just north of Toronto. And one of the biggest things that I see in youth and people is that skill sets. We have a massive immigration policy with so many people that show up day after day that do not have the skills. And yet I think it keeps other young people from obtaining the jobs. At the same time, a lot of the youth people that come into the workforce simply, go to universities or various trade schools and come out with very little, seem to have skills that have been referred and reflected in various people's comments today. I think the other biggest thing is that innovation. We're lacking productivity, as Mrs. Riso has indicated, and I would, agree with 100% of his comments that he's outlined earlier on the taxation, the government, the percentage of people employed in the government, the waste that exists, the taxation. Our productivity is going down constantly. A lot of the programs that I find that the government supports do not necessarily drive efficiency and drive what is necessary in plants. It wants to constantly focus on innovation, but innovation that may not necessarily drive what is necessity today in order to bring about higher productivity where company needs it, as it's driven around certain mandates that are outside of necessarily what the corporate company needs. At the same time, I think that there is tremendous opportunities when you look at transferring businesses and stuff like this. I've heard over the years that people want to keep companies in Canada, but the taxation and the process and the way we're taxed, it makes it very difficult to keep a company in Canada or transfer it into your youth or into your family with respect to things. I think there's, the opportunity to increase people's skill set. I think there's opportunities to we look around at where we're spending our money as a government and what are we putting forward. We seem to lack the necessity to execute on our human resources across Canada. We should be one of the richest countries in Canada, and yet we seem to allow various minority groups that influences all decisions instead of, as Mr. Risi says, we need a 10-year plan that literally drives, a consistency, irregardless of the stripes of the very political parties, that is cohesive, that drives the betterment of Canada. And when we don't have that constant betterment of Canada and the various small institutional groups that influences everything, and it drives costs, through the roof with respect to things. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to improve our healthcare systems and drive more and more people and educate more people to participate in various other types of trades and or skill sets that people can be. And I would look at, the immigration policy that I think is also, has plagued our country in various ways with respect to that. But I think the challenges today with regards to youth is having them have ability or having, more knowledge and more understanding. There's a significant lack of skills when it comes to trade skills. All the youth seems to go to university, but they come out of school and they really don't have the skills, whether it be in engineering or various things, the skills to be able to do various jobs. And yet there's a massive lack of trade people. That doesn't seem to be supported in institutions and schools as it used to be many, many years ago, realizing that AI is coming and doing things, but there's certain things that AI will not be replacing, and I think a lot of those is also in the trades fields. And how can Canada, help youth that, make better money than university students get a job, trade, and have, better education and a better future by thinking about what type of, job do they want to have, living they want to have. And I think there's not enough education around the trade industry for people to make a very good AI technologies or computer technologies or a financial wizard. Yet I think so many people go that leaves them with very little skills coming out to be able to participate or add value in a major corporation. We could do a better job in educating our youth and helping them better understand some of the obtain a positive job, to obtain a good income and a good living, and this would be my comments, and my comments with regards to is taxation. Company from continue to invest in youth. How do we train people? How do we bring people into the company?
Thank you.
Training those people.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And we're having a sound issue. I'm going to suspend for a few moments. We have to change systems before we get into the question and answer session. So I'm going, how much time? We need 5+ moments to change out the system. We'll suspend for 5+ minutes. Suspend. not, the issue could present again, at which time I would have to suspend for a full reboot of the system, which could take 10 moments. Thank you for your patience, witnesses. We'll see how we get along. Just for committee members, the first round will be 6 minutes to each of the parties, followed by 5 minutes to the government, 5 minutes to the official opposition, 2.5 minutes to the third party, until and we'll follow that rotation to the end of the meeting. So with that, we'll begin with Mr. Genis for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Back in June, Conservatives sought emergency hearings on the unemployment crisis facing our country. Unfortunately, we did not have support from the Liberals to proceed with summer hearings on an emergency basis. So we've had to now wait more than 3 months to get this work underway. But I am very glad that we are finally beginning this critical study on the really catastrophic unemployment crisis facing young Canadians. The unemployment rate for young people is at 14.5%. We have the worst employment rate in this country in well over 25 years. And despite not having that summer study that Conservatives were seeking, we've continued to highlight...
Excuse me, Mr. Genis, are you live streaming?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm going to suspend while I get a clarification on direction on this.
What?
I'm suspending until I get clarification.
What in the world is the issue with live streaming on social media? Thank you, Chair, and thank you for noting that we're live streaming these hearings on my social media platforms, which is, of course, very common and allowed, and people can follow me on the various social media platforms if they're interested in following the live stream of this and subsequent meetings. Chair, as I was saying, Conservatives sought emergency hearings on the unemployment crisis. Those hearings were blocked from taking place over the summer. We are finally getting down to work on that, and I'm very pleased that we're finally beginning this work on the catastrophic unemployment crisis facing this country. The youth unemployment rate is 14.5%. We have the worst employment rate for young people in this country in over 25 years. And despite not having the form of this committee to raise these issues, we've continued to meet with people and speak about them over the intervening months. And what we've highlighted is a number of different causes of the unemployment crisis facing our country: a broken immigration system as a result of policy failures, misalignment in education and training, but also serious problems in terms of economic policy. And we've heard today from witnesses, business owners in particular, highlighting economic policy failures that have played a significant role in this ongoing unemployment crisis. Mr. Rizzo, you spoke about structural unemployment due to declining productivity over the last 10 years. Structural unemployment due to declining productivity over the last 10 years. And now, I think it's important to underline how important productivity is as a measure of the health of the economy. It's not a measure of how hard people are working, but it is a measure of how much a worker is producing in a given period of time. And increases in productivity require business investment, require systems and technology that allow workers to produce more in a given period of time. So I wonder if you could elaborate on your comment that we face structural unemployment due to declining productivity over the last 10 years, and what you see as the factors contributing to this decline in productivity.
Sure. Well, fundamentally, when companies are plagued with too many operating costs and high taxation, there's less money to invest. And when you're competing globally, you have additional pressures to remain hyper competitive. So if we take Ontario as an example, our ability to invest in manufacturing, which is very capital intensive and long term for paybacks, it's very difficult for us to invest the millions and millions of dollars necessary to invest in the new technology to increase our productivity when we are largely deemed to be uncompetitive from everywhere else in the world, right? So we have less resources, less funding, and less money left over.
Thank you. Can I just sharpen the question a little bit, sir? What specifically are you seeing from the federal government that is making investments in manufacturing here in Canada, here in Ontario, less competitive? What are the decisions from the national government that are impacting that reality?
The decisions, I would say, are a lack of investment in manufacturing, a lack of investment in or creating policies that increase productivity or competitiveness, and those are wide-ranging. They're almost in every area. So you have a combination of all kinds of a lack of economic long-term strategic planning that is affecting companies to plan and to be competitive in the long term. Specifically, you have the taxation policies are known to be uncompetitive compared to the rest of the world, and this is creating a big problem for people and for companies to move forward.
Thank you, sir. I'll bring Mr. Johnson in on that. Would you agree that we face structural unemployment due to declining productivity over the last 10 years? And what do you think is, if you agree, what do you think is contributing to that decline in productivity?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think exactly what Mr. Reese says. I think also, the taxation policy that exists in Canada does not support the investments and the time it takes to write it. Recently, Trump announced that you could depreciate an asset over, 12 months or 1 year instead of taking 5 years. So as you turn around and longer depreciation is indicated the type of capital intensity that is in manufacturing, you got to get a return on that. And I think at the same time, skills. I think that there's a major shortage of certain skills that are existing. The immigration policy that has existed now for the last number of years that I think is also...
Thank you. Sorry, I'm almost out of time, and I will want to come back to that. But it sounds like what you're saying is that we've got unemployment because of an unfriendly business environment, which is the result of high taxes. Is that a central part of the equation?
Yes, that's a critical one. Yes.
Janice, your time is up. Madame Koutrakis. Madame Koutrakis for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. And I would just say to the last comment that my colleague across the way said, we're always looking for simple answers to very complicated issues. So it's not as simple as Mr. Genuis would want the Canadians watching us to believe that that is the case. But going forward with my questioning of the witnesses, my first question will be to Monsieur Rudy Humbert. Nous savons que de nombreux jeunes au Québec.
We know that many young people in Quebec are facing unemployment rates that are very high, and the Government of Canada has invested in programs like youth employment programs. In your experience, have federal programs been sufficient? Have they been successful to help young Quebecers who are the furthest away from the labor market? Thank you so much for your question. It's definitely a step in the right direction to help young people. The funding structure of these agreements goes through the Quebec government and Service Quebec, and it is very important for us. To give you an idea, 3 years ago, there was a $30 million envelope. It has been re-signed for $18 million this year. Service Quebec takes $4 million. And so there has been a drop in what money is available compared to the federal government. We need to be able to directly recruit young people to improve the situation. But it is a step in the right direction. We need greater flexibility. We need universality. And we need to explore other ways to provide a greater impact. But what can be done to better support associations like yours who offer services like the youth employment program in areas of Quebec? While there is the federal envelope that should be aligned with the municipal undertakings, there is a conflict of jurisdiction at the present time. So we need to sit down, the federal government, the Quebec government, to ensure that there is a better channeling of what is available to young people. Federal funding is heavily subsidizing these youth programs in Quebec, but 20% of the young people were able to participate last year. It doesn't appear in the federal agreements. So really, we've got to align the agreements with the structural, practical application of the programs themselves. My last question for you, what is the main frustration that you hear from young people when they're searching for a job? The context is such, the rise in unemployment is such, is that 3/4 of young people feel that they are less well off than their parents. And they have to be involved in the decisions that concern them because there has to be full participation as to how each public dollar is spent. It should be directed to young people.
My next questions will be to Mr. John Buck. Thank you for being here. We know that minority language communities face higher unemployment rates and vulnerabilities, and the Government of Canada has made targeted investments to support youth in these communities. And I'd like to know a little bit more from you. Have you encountered challenges with accessing federal grants and contributions?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question as we take advantage of these investments and ultimately help our communities to thrive and sustain themselves. As an organization, CEDEC finds itself as being a primarily federally funded entity, and as a consequence, it is exempt from some of the provincial requirements that exist for organizations like, for example, Mr. Humberts, that may find itself and his members being primarily provincially funded. And so, in fact, where federal investments are desirable, we find ourselves being ideally suited to actually act as an intermediary to make sure resources really reach the communities where they're intended to be reached. We work very closely with our provincial counterparts. We work very closely with the Réseau des Carrefours Jeunesse Emploi, as well as other employment service providers. But there are jurisdictional considerations that are always, I think, in play, and we always have to be attentive to those.
As we all do around this table, we always have to be very mindful of that. Do you see direct federal funding as more effective than funding that flows through Quebec in reaching the vulnerable youth being the core piece of the question?
I think in the context of funds flowing, I think all parties have an interest in making sure that those vulnerable youth are served. We work in an official languages context, which adds a layer of complexity to that discussion as well. We find ourselves official language act anchored and action plan anchored in terms of our efforts. And so it makes sense that as we try to support the advancement of policy related to official languages, that the federal government be a key partner with us in doing that. Simultaneously, I think all of us have an interest in seeing an economy that thrives. And so working with the government of Quebec, working with stakeholders from public, private, civil society sectors really means that we all win. We all thrive when that happens.
Thank you. Thank you.
Koutrakis, Madame Gill, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier d'abord l'ensemble.
Thank you to the witnesses who are so interested in youth unemployment. I've listened closely to each of your interventions today. I've made many notes. And I'd first of all like to ask questions of the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec. Perhaps a clarification. And perhaps just to clarify, Mr. Pajot, you read very quickly because I know 5 minutes isn't very long. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you talk about something that was alarming. Is it an alarming situation or is it merely a very important situation? Did I understand correctly? Quite. It is youth unemployment is both alarming and important. But in Quebec, we are, over the past 25 years, very close to the average, to the median. It's not so high in Quebec, but 6% over the past 15 or 25 years. If you look at the other OECD countries, for example, it's much higher there, 2 to 3 times higher than the adult unemployment rates. So there's also the issue of training here. There's also the possibility of excellent programs that can be accessed. That is how we look at the figures in Quebec. Thank you. The Library of Parliament has done research for us, and when we look at the unemployment rate in the 15 to 25 group, it's dropped in Quebec, but less so elsewhere in Canada. We don't know the population exactly. The same thing for the rate of employment that has increased in Quebec versus other areas in Canada. So that's one thing. And then in your presentation, I thought I heard you say that you didn't want to pit youth unemployment and other workers. I would like to hear you perhaps give us more detail on that. You seem to be saying, yes, there is unemployment amongst the youth. That's what we see. But you seem to be looking towards a broader horizon. In 2023 in Quebec, there was 1.4 million that got jobs. So yes, in the public space, it has been mentioned that the DRT program is one of the reasons, one of the causes of unemployment in youth in Quebec. The unemployment, high unemployment, is amongst young men who are students that don't have any positions, any jobs. 25% have full-time positions, but it's not necessarily a need for students. But if you take away the agricultural workers, the foreign temporary workers are working there is no cause and effect linkage between the unemployment and those facts. But what we need in Quebec is manpower. We need more workers. It's a matter of geography, of not competency. We have 4.6 is the average, as I indicated earlier, and we're not far from it. But if you look on the longer term, and we've done some calculations, 106,000 new immigrant workers will be needed in the short term, in the coming short term. And then you go beyond that to the long term. But on the long term, we will need 1.4 million more workers because the birth rate in Quebec is not being renewed. It's low. We are looking at the current issue of youth unemployment, but I say we must have a forward-looking perspective to the future and to see how that can be acclimatized to market needs. And there's the issue of skills and skills training. So you have the issue of immigration, and that too has to be aligned with the labor market, not just a permanent type of immigration like we have in Quebec. All of this is important for the various businesses. Thank you, Mr. Pajot. Mr. Humbert, 30 seconds. You talked about accessibility and youth. EI has to be reformed. That is what you are saying. I think you have said that it would be urgent to protect and support young people by so doing. Yes, only about 1/3 of the unemployed have access to employment insurance, and the number of accumulated hours is difficult for them to attain. There are various other factors, but so often young people are not eligible for employment insurance, and that is negatively affecting them. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Madame Cobena, I believe you're up next with 5 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Rizzo, you spoke about how Canada needs to get serious about creating jobs and creating jobs and creating jobs. You have a unique perspective in that you have about 38 years of experience creating businesses, creating jobs, opening businesses in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. Can you speak about how Canada compares to these other two countries in terms of the ease of opening a business?
Well, simply put, we don't compete. Ohio did an economic development plan for one of our divisions and had it tabled, papered, authored, and approved in less than 6 months. In Mexico, we opened greenfield sites. We had economic development teams meet with us on a Tuesday, and by the following Thursday before we were leaving, they had a whole proposal ahead of us. We flew down the following week. They tabled more than $2.8 million in investment money to lure us to their specific state. And they asked us to come down the following week. We told them we had some additional issues. Those issues were solved within 1 business day. And we signed and penned the deal and built 2 facilities in Mexico, all within 6 months. We were operational within 18 months. And that just doesn't happen in Canada. Not even remotely. We can't even get funding for development projects in Canada. By the time we fill out and try to address any strategy in Canada, you're talking about a lengthy, cumbersome, red-taped, administratively heavy process that by the time it's done, there's no money left for the entrepreneur or the actual core value of what was intended.
Okay, there. So as a business owner, not only is it difficult for you to open a business, but of course, when you finally open a business here in Canada, you're taxed when you earn, you're taxed when you hire, you're taxed when you grow, and then, of course, you're taxed again if you sell through the capital gains tax. So would you say that success then in Canada is in fact punished?
Absolutely. And, we talk about that. You can see that in the productivity numbers, right? I mean, there's compelling documents, reports. One is through NBC Economic Strategy and Data Reports. And the title is called The Industrial Implosion. And it clearly identifies investments in capital and growth in the United States versus Canada. And I'll just hold this up quickly, but I'm sure it can be supplied. These charts represent the blue line, the United States, and its investment strategy on equipment and capital, and you can see the red line for Canada. over the last 10, 15 years. So, yes, it's just when I talked about earlier, the question was asked, when you talk about high input costs, meaning wages, to the immigration policy issue, we tried to hire some engineers and program managers during growth in Canada, and each one of them all of them coming into our facility wanted $80,000 to $100,000 to start. And they referenced the high living expenses in Toronto, for instance. And, between the car insurance costs, between the rent costs, between the living costs, we hear every reason why, as an owner and as an entrepreneur, I need to be burdened with all these costs in order to compete. And when you're competing against companies in Georgia who are paying $16 to $17 for general labor, they're paying their program management engineering teams an average wage of $70,000 to $80,000 in U.S., compare that to Mexico at $65,000 US dollars, and you're looking at people in Canada wanting $130,000. This just makes us, completely uncompetitive.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. And the Liberal government, of course, ran on a platform of making decisions and changes at a speed not seen in generations. Have you seen that since they became elected, which is 6 months, so half a year really has now passed and gone? Have you seen any changes that have made it easier for you to create jobs?
Yeah, absolutely not. I'm amazed that the state that Canada's in, given the economic pressures that we have, and take immediate actions to create very significant action plans to start addressing all these concerns, and yet I haven't seen little to no action to address any of these concerns. And it's mind-blowing to me. It's mind-boggling to me that this isn't being addressed on so many fronts. We should be exploiting our natural resources. We should be building pipelines. We should be creating internal growth in Canada, creating jobs in Canada. There should be a buy Canadian product and manufacturing investment strategy. And, I haven't seen anything tangible, including military spending. I haven't seen one form or procurement model that says we're going to revamp that.
Thank you,
and we're going to
Mr.
meet with
Russo, Madame Cobena, Madame de Rocher, for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, first of all, that it is very clear that the unemployment rate amongst young people is very disquieting. I spoke with my colleagues this summer about that, but it's too bad that today's meeting is being used to communicate messages that are highly subject to discussion. My colleague said earlier, with respect to what was done this summer, we weren't on holiday. I met with a dozen or so businesses in my riding. I met with Carrefour Jeunesse Emploi in my riding and others to understand what their reality is, what reality they were living. And a lot of the points that the witnesses today have brought up about the inadequacy and lack of skills that our young people come out of their education lacking, that they just don't have these skills. There is a situation of inadequacy. I will come back to that because I think it is important today. We are seeking solutions for very real problems right now. Let me bring you back to, and we spoke about the temporary foreign workers program. I would invite everybody to remember that in 2021-22, there was a huge lack of workers. There were few workers, whether they were young or not. There were no employees to be hired. I keep that in mind. And the program that is in place today those programs were to correct that situation. Perhaps they were put in place a few years ago. Perhaps that has led to the situation today. That's why we're meeting today. That's why we have this type of study in committee, to try to find the proper solutions to adequately respond to the problem. I would like to come back to a comment made by a witness about the manufacturing sector. The government is investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the manufacturing sector every year in Canada, right across in Alberta, in British Columbia, in the north, in Quebec, in the Maritimes, buying equipment, starting new production lines, improving productivity. So I think that we should perhaps just look at that more closely. Madame Colombier, we said before the election that we would come up with a strategic response for the trade war. We set up building Canada homes that allows us to use our own softwood lumber, our own material that is Canadian. And now you have a defense. Mr. Rizzo, I don't know if you heard the announcement made 2 weeks ago about these policy, the acquisitions policy for procurement that would be Canada First. We are putting forward these ideas. That said, Mr. Gagnon, I know that other colleagues have spoken about the issue of a first-time job. Our government has co-op programs to try to help. But do you have any suggestions to promote these first-time hires in the manufacturing industry? It would be very useful if you could give us some guidance or comments. Yes, thank you. It's a very important question. Now, one of the elements that we do in Quebec very well, perhaps less well elsewhere in Canada, are co-op programs, internships that take place on the job, in the workplace. And it doesn't matter what government, it doesn't really matter what government is in, these programs take place. Small and medium-sized businesses accompany these young people in their job and try to provide for greater productivity. And this is one of the vectors of success. You mentioned issues with respect to COP. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Madame Desroches.
Madame Gill for 2 minutes.
Ms. Gill, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you. My question, and I was wondering about this too. So once again, for Mr. Gagnon or Mr. Pajot, the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce, I want to come back to the future again. You spoke about the challenge of the future. It will be hard to fill jobs. What do you see as that challenge? We know what is happening with young people. You represent, you said, 45,000 members in your association. What do you see in the future for us to help us make recommendations to help young people in the future? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, there are challenges remaining. And over the past years, we've seen the trades that young people are trained to do are very important. There are new changes looming over us. The capacity of our educational institutions to be able to adapt to that change. We don't really see much of that. They don't seem to be adapting a curriculum that would allow students to be better prepared for the future. If they only change a curriculum every 2 or 3 years, that's a sign that our study programs are not very well adapted to this time. All along, throughout the career of our young people, there has to be an ability to adapt. And I think that insistence on digital literacy, the basic skills are important. That will allow them, I hope, to adapt to the major challenges ahead. My colleague Stéphane mentioned the geographical issues, because there are regions that are very, very different, one region as compared to the other. So you invest in national programs, immigration programs, but there should be some consideration given to the disparities, the regional disparities that you find throughout Canada, where things are completely different. And you want to be able to access regional partnerships like Carrefour, which would allow them to better meet the needs of the specific region and the infrastructure that is required. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for taking the time to be here and to share their experience with our committee. Mr. Johnson, I'd like to start with you if possible. In your opening remarks, you had made some comments regarding skill sets and that there's a shortage of skills. I'm just wondering if you could expand a little bit on that and what you exactly mean by shortage of skills.
Yeah, sure. I would say tradespeople with regards to, I'm in manufacturing, as I mentioned earlier. So from electricians to millwrights to programmers in software, robotics, and then you can expand beyond that from the point of skills. I think there's a lot of people that come into the workforce that simply might go to school for engineering or something else, but they lack the skills to be able to bring value to the company. And as we're out and I'm competing against a number of other companies constantly, and one of the number one things is strong mechanical, capable people in manufacturing in order to, we're fairly automated. And as we bring in more and more automation, we require a different level of skill set in order to maintain that automation. And it is a challenge to find the skill set today in the environment that we live in today.
Okay, thank you. And so you said you were in manufacturing, so that would just be one facet of the economy. I know we're in a housing crisis in this country, and the government has promised that they're going to build all these houses, but what we're finding, and this committee has found in previous parliaments, is we don't have the skill set to do that, aka the tradespeople. Yeah. So how are we going to build everything that we need to power Canada, house Canadians, manufacture our goods if we don't have those tradespeople to do that? So I think that that's something that's very, very important to point out. We need those tradespeople to keep the lights on, to build the foundations, to build the walls, to do all of those things.
And they can make a very good wage and a very good living in the sense of this, from a point of, young electricians to plumbers to anyone. They're not aware, and I think, the investment in their time, and I don't think it's promoted enough and allowed people enough compared to what it used to be.
Absolutely. So. I do come from a very trade-heavy part of the country. Energy and agriculture are our driving forces, and so it's very common for kids to ask other kids, what trade school are you going to? What trade are you getting? And we need more of that. Mr. Rizzo, I'd just like to follow up with something that you have spoken about. You had mentioned about red tape. I'm just wondering, is red tape affecting or causing input, or is it causing what's the word? Impact, maybe? Maybe that's the word I'm looking for, on productivity in the country?
Yeah, look, I think I have a great scenario for you. I have multiple facilities, and I I take the time to walk to, out to all the little industrial units that are around me. And at one time, they were filled with little companies that were fabricating, machining, and now they're mostly service sector type oriented jobs, moving furniture, providing some type of service. So with respect to your question on red tape, I dropped by a small steel fabricator. He's been doing it for 15, 25 years out of this unit. And a young person came by the other day working for the town and walked in with an iPad and started writing up infringements. A skid was against the wall, that's an infringement. Your air makeup unit is not interlocked, that's an infringement. Another thing. And by the end of 2 hours, it was $5,000 to $8,000 worth of administrative costs and small details to fix that were working perfectly fine, and there was no safety issues, but there's some new compliance. So, the owner talked to me and he said, there's $8,000 I have less to invest in my people. That's $8,000 less that I have to invest in my company. And he has it's absolutely ridiculous. And that's just the amount of people employed by the government to be involved with every type of issue, whether it's building. I mean, if you talk about, the conservation authorities or the building departments or the municipalities, or, God forbid you want to do much in Canada without being saddled with at least 10 levels of something to go through in order to get an objective achieved. So, the red tape still exists on every level. I think it's a function of too much government.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Fancy. Ms. Fancy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for all of the witnesses that are here today. As a former educator and high school principal, administrator, I've worked for almost 2 decades with many youth. I might feel like I have a PhD in teenagers, some might say. Most of these youth entering work for the first time. As a university fellow who studied youth prioritization in regards to policy, but also in regards to protection of youth. This is a study that is very near and dear to my heart, and I just wanted to put on record today that it's not something that the Conservatives have been saying we've been lackluster within this study, and it is not, because today we are here to listen, learn, and we are seeking solutions. So my first question is for Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, in your introduction, you said that you hire people without skills. So I'm thinking, why would you do this? What I am also thinking, what is your experience within recruiting and retaining workers? So we're looking at what are some of the recruitment and retainment strategies that you use within your manufacturing company? Thank you.
I don't hire people, sorry to maybe misunderstood or whatever, people that don't have skills with respect to it. And as far as retaining people, I think the number one thing is to, we build a brand in what we do. So we try to create a culture that people want to be part of and an environment that people want to be environment and continue to offer them a career that they can move up because, we have people coming into us that is at general labor level with respect to that and try to look at them and say, what is it you want to do in your life? What is it you want to achieve? And then to be able to show them some sense of a career that they could advance and move from $20 an hour to, $80,000 to $100,000 or more a year in the sense of that. So we continue to try to provide a vision to people. However, when it comes to recruiting people, we are virtually, anytime we run an ad or deal with anything, we're virtually dealing with people that are immigrants that are coming into the country. But a lot of the immigrants are not necessarily qualified or speaking. It's very, very difficult to get I would say certain educated people in a certain workforce with respect to that, and it's dominated. I heard from somebody the other day, that their child shows up to a job with regards to it, and there's 20-some people in line of them, and they're all willing to work for less, and they're all willing to work for cash money. So the system of employment in Canada today is largely controlled by a lot of temp agencies with regards to it. And I think that there's a structure that is broken inside that system.
So thank you, Mr. Johnson. So I got your answer now in your introduction when you were telling us that the country is being run by minority groups, that they are running the show. So thank you for that answer. Another question I have for you is how the federal government supports, such as wage subsidies and co-op programs, played a role in enabling you to hire youth.
They really haven't played much of a role in it with respect to it because it's such a short term and such a small incentive program that it really doesn't make there's no significant move our company forward. We're focused on how do we find the best people that can do the job this long term with respect to it. So as far as some of the programs that we have worked with in the government in the past will be associated with capital expenditures around equipment, one thing or another with respect to it. We have not realized or taken advantage of and not seen anything that really has been worthwhile with regards to that.
So what you're saying then is that you are not taking advantage of any of the federal programs. My next question I have is for John Buck. Thank you, Mr. Buck, for being here today. So as an alumni from the FSWEP program, the Federal Student Work Experience program, many years ago, I won't date myself, while studying in university as a poor, vulnerable youth in rural Nova Scotia. My question for you is, what impact do you feel programs like these that I just mentioned, or the Canada Summer Jobs or Youth Employment and Skills Strategy have young people in both minority language communities or in other vulnerable communities benefited from?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Fancy. These are really significant, really important opportunities. With respect to, I think, addressing the primary challenge that I identified, and that's ultimately the skills mismatch. So what we have with respect to supply and what the demand is. And in many cases, there's a lack of alignment. And programs like this help to actually bridge that gap in many ways so that we do see students, while they're undertaking their studies, have the opportunity to understand what the employer's needs are and focus the direction of their studies on really being an asset to the employer. And so I think the experience of, and I'll use the federal student program, could be replicated in the private sector.
Mr. Buck, you can finish that later. Thank you, Ms. Fancy. Now we'll go 5 minutes. Mr. Genis, you leading? Mr. Genis?
Thank you, Chair. I'm following with great interest the discussion that's happening today because we're hearing from witnesses about how the system for employment right now is broken. And there have been emerging problems over the last 10 years that have got us to this point. And what we're hearing in response to that is Liberal MPs essentially expressing hurt feelings or not liking what they're hearing, trying to disagree with claims from witnesses about the problems. And I just want to point out that, the unemployment numbers are both brutal and objective. The unemployment numbers don't respond to the feelings of anybody around the table. They tell the story. And what we're hearing from the witnesses, but more critically what we're seeing in the Statistics Canada numbers, is demonstration of the failures of the government. You can say we've tried to put in place all these programs, but my question is, are those programs working? And that's what we see in the numbers that show that it's not working, that the unemployment crisis continues to get worse, and that whatever the government says about its efforts, they're not reversing the trend that has resulted from decisions they've made. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Reynolds.
About 3.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming here today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. My first question is for Mr. Johnson. You had talked about a lack of skilled trades. So coincidentally, I'm actually a construction electrician. I've been a construction electrician for 20 years. I know what you're talking about. I've found in my career that there's not really a push to put people in the trades. There's not really a recognition of the importance of skilled trades. I think the attitude that I've seen in a lot of schools, especially certainly when I was in high school, that people who couldn't cut it in university, well, you can just go into the trades. And I still see that today. Do you think that there's a way that we could start to change that opinion? Because obviously we really need skilled tradespeople. Like, how do you think that we could be able to start to change that narrative and make it more enticing for young people?
Yeah. First of all, I think you need to be able to bring back some sense of trades inside high schools and places with regards to it. It doesn't seem to have a lot of that. And I think at the same time is to give people an understanding of what the kind of money you can make in the trade industry. Kids coming out of whether it be electrical or plumbing or millwrights or any of that is making a lot more money than the kid necessarily coming right directly out of engineering. So I think having an understanding of the skill set the pay you can make, the living you can make, the lifestyle you can live, and I would say that they also, I think, have a greater chance of developing and building their own business because of the shortage of the skilled trades. And I think it's also allowing them to understand that the security of a job is way greater to get that job, and the longevity of that job is a lot greater. So I think that I don't think young people really understand trades as a whole and what they could consider, and I don't think many people actually really understand the choice of their education and what was going to be their chance of getting a job, or what they will earn when they get a job, or the percentage chance of getting employment too.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Buck. I'm wondering about the programs that you have that you offer. Do any of them direct people towards skilled trades?
Absolutely. So Mr. Reynolds, thank you for the question, working with the public, private, and civil society sectors in a very local context to understand what are the opportunities that exist. We're working directly with employers that are suggesting to us, this is what we need. How do we get it? And so in many cases, and it could be in any one of the industries that we've talked about today, it could be in construction, electricity, for example, if there is a need in that way, we're able to work with both the supply and with the talent out there to make sure that we're shaping the pipeline in a way that responds to the local needs.
Thank you.
Reynolds, you're the only one who lived within your time. Thank you. Monsieur Joseph, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Joseph, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And congratulations, Mr. Garnett. You missed your career as a filmmaker. You like to be behind the camera, and that would have been a career. But you are using unemployment for political purposes, it seems to me. Now, let me continue. You have talked about a decline in productivity, 14.5% unemployment amongst young people. Is it because of unemployment? Is it because of immigration, rather? Mr. Garnett has put that on the back of immigration. Is this unemployment being caused by foreign workers immigrating here? I don't think so. Now, you have employers that there is a vacancy of 100,000 jobs, but you're going to have to be able to fill those vacant jobs. And a question for Mr. Rizzo. Has your business benefited from federal programs, from incentives for learning, for apprenticeship for the young people that you hire? This is my first question to Mr. Rizzo. Risotto. I always say risotto, but I mean Rizzo.
That's no problem. Thank you. Look, I think there is some programs that are helpful. I want to put it in context. I'm a tool maker. I'm a tradesman. That's how I started, right? But, you know, when I started over 40 years ago, the incentive to be a tool maker was $7,200, and I probably was making $31,000. And it was well known that as an apprentice, I would probably make more mistakes and be more costly to the company for the first 5 years than they would make off of me. But, you know, today, my son went into the same trade that I went in, tool making, and he received $4,000 a year. So if we're going to say we're going to invest in tradespeople, and it's 40 years later, then there's something really specifically wrong, right? So there is still investments. They do help, but I would say it's largely borne by the employer who's committed to those tradespeople, because we're employing them and creating income for them while they learn, which is a great program. I'm a big fan of everything should be an apprenticeship or should be a paid co-op. Internships should be banned if they're not paid. I have interns that come and work for me for human resource, so everyone gets paid. No one works in my company for free. I just don't believe in it. So there is some good programs. We have used them. I just wish they were more, and they were more in line with what's needed in today's economy.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Gagnon, now, congratulations for everything you have done. It's exceptional work. They talk about equity and fairness in terms of jobs, but we know that our government is focusing on respecting, 100% respecting equity. So in jobs. So why do you say that you have trouble placing young people in terms of diversity? I'm talking about people, women, men, trans. Do you have difficulty placing young people like that in your business? Historically speaking, these groups have always faced issues in terms of finding jobs. Can you hear me? Are you with me or not? Yes, go ahead. Yes, there are issues. We talk about young people today, but I do know that there are immigrants who have to face issues in terms of unemployment in an economic climate like we have today. I understand that your question, maybe you should be asking it to Mr. Humber. It would be better posed to him. Okay. Thank you for your question. I share your feeling of urgency with respect to this issue because the rate of unemployment in youth is higher than in the past, 25 years ago. We have to find more structural solutions to unemployment. That leads to broken lives, social, economic costs. 80% of job losses affect young people. In terms of diversity, the unemployment is double the rate of other groups, and there are barriers that exist for these groups on the labor market. Thank you, Mr. Josep. Ms. Gill, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you. I'll speak very quickly. I would first of all like to hear some recommendations. You're giving us more information to the committee that will, of course, help our discussion, but I would like recommendations. First of all, to do with the precarious situation of young people. And Mr. Buck, the issue of young people in regions, we spoke about it a bit earlier, but I know that the coasters community on the North Shore is very difficult to hire young people because of the criteria that have been established. So maybe we could talk about that outside of the committee. Also, la Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, there from Stats Canada, there is a specific drop between 2020 and 2024 throughout Canada, not just strictly in Canada. There are sectors that are specific to that: housing, restaurants, hospitality, and retail. Have you looked at the COVID period? With your members, that was definitely a very difficult period. You did mention that. And another question. Mr. Gagnon seemed to say that there were challenges to be met with respect to education, because we have to be very nimble nowadays, not just the federal government, but the provinces. Can you give us some specific examples about what you meant with reference to Quebec and versus the other provinces and territories? I'll just answer the first part of the question. We have seen a drop in Quebec in the three sectors that you mentioned. And with respect to vacancies in retail, restaurants, hospitality, and lodging, it is true. But there are other sectors in Quebec that could fall into this statistic, but there are associations that represent them, 4.2% unemployment. So I can say that there is an enormous need out there, and the federal government should be taking that into account. There is a difference being made by the programs, the vacancies, job vacancies for these industries. We think that it is a reflection of the specific moment, the conjuncture, and tourism has dropped, and so, of course, there is an effect. That would be my answer. Yes, there has been a drop in these sectors. It has hit not just students, but they are being fairly hard hit. You have to address it throughout Canada and look to the future. Think about it on the long term, how that will. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
I have Madame Cabena for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Liberal members here in the committee like to say that their government has made investments in our economy. And if that is, in fact, the case, then they are making investments with a negative return. When we have unemployment at 7.1%, which is nearing recession levels, when we have $63 billion of investment fleeing our country since Mr. Carney took office, $8.3 billion in June alone, then that investment has a negative return. Also, I'd like to remember the members that it is entrepreneurs and small businesses, like some of our witnesses here today, that create jobs, not the government. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Rizzo. What are the biggest obstacles you face today when trying to grow your business or hire people and create jobs?
Well, as I said before, I can speak that the banking industry in Canada has a real significant problem. It's risk adverse. It's not willing to invest in high growth network companies. They're just making money too easily, and they're allowed to make money too easily. So therefore, getting banks to support companies with any kind of dream or entrepreneurial spirit, and that don't fit into all the covenants and ratios and analysis work, it's not going to happen. Then you're left with EDC and BDC, who are there to help and support companies, but let's be honest, they charge 11% interest rates. So the way they help entrepreneurs grow is by charging us extremely high levels of debt loads to carry. So it's counterproductive. It's counterintuitive to me. It seems on the surface that we have these systems to work, but in reality, they're just extremely costly and actually hurt companies and their ability to grow. So that's one aspect. The financial institutions are one. Number two, again, your input costs are just so high in Canada. So, my son pays $5,000. I have 4 boys. They all pay $5,000 to $6,000 a year just for car insurance. The same age boys that live in Vermont, Connecticut, or any of my facilities that work around the world, they pay $800 to $1,200. My kids pay $350 for their cell phones and data plans and internet service. And in Mexico, it's $12 unlimited calls, coverage, and data for the employees in Mexico. So when you look at what I talked about earlier, oligopolies, like we've allowed our society, and largely through the government over years, allowed Canada to become extremely non-competitive. All these factors and people demanding high wages, it just doesn't leave. There's nowhere out for companies to invest. There's ways forward, but that takes really significant long-term planning, and it needs major policy shifts, such as drastically reducing taxes for manufacturing companies, lowering hydro rates, lowering input costs like petrochemicals or raw materials to allow Canadian firms to compete globally.
And on the topic of EDC, so Export Development Canada, that you bring up in your remarks, Export Development Canada is, of course, a corporation. It's an arm of the government. In the context of trade and the trade war that we have going on, have you seen any programs that Export Development Canada has made available to your industry to support you in this, the impacts of these trade wars?
Well, EDC continues to have some programs, so it's really BDC that has been, I believe, given a mandate to help with, let's say, loans and things of that to deal with the trade war. But let's be honest, if a company loses sales, right, it doesn't just want more debt. That doesn't help them. Adding more debt to our books is not a path forward, and saying, well, here's another loan, or all the stuff stacks up on a company, and what we need is lower taxation, and we need a go forward plan. EDC and BDC fill roles where the conventional banks don't want to provide that financing. So thank God they're there for us, right? But they don't offer it at a competitive rate. You're paying a premium, and it's very costly. And
in the context of trying to diversify and look for markets outside of Canada, Canada has a bad reputation, that we're difficult to do business with. That even if our price and our quality is comparable to, say, an American company, we're always going to lose that piece of business. Have you seen something like this? Have you experienced something like this in your business?
Thank you.
Well, yeah.
Your time is over. Madame Kotrakos pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a difficult time trying to follow the testimony here. We are studying youth employment, and I have the floor now. So I'm trying to see, the relationship between the study at hand and the testimony that we are hearing from some of the witnesses today. And so I think most Canadians would agree that we do not simply want to put this all on the shoulder of governments to create thousands of jobs, although governments do have a role to play, and they do. And this is why we're having this study, to make sure that as we go forward, we're putting in place the policies and the programs that are needed to make sure that we take care of that. And most importantly, we want to help them to develop good careers. So for the people who are employers here, and I don't know if this is Mr. Johnson and Mr. Rizzo, how do we create an environment where the private sector, you're both in the private sector, so I'm sure you've got some insight to share with us, how do we incentivize to hire more young people in jobs that earn them more money, but also will help them develop their careers or, in fact, find new careers? And I'm not looking for your bottom line. I know obviously people go into business because they want to make money, and that's the backbone of our Canadian economy, is for us to have successful businesses. Nobody around this room is going to say otherwise. But I would like to ask you as employers, what is your responsibility to help youth find jobs, and for you to encourage them and mentor them, whether it's in skills trades or any other kind of job? So what is your responsibility as the private sector in this whole thing? And I'm genuine in my question. I would like that to be part of our report, because I think if there's anybody that can give us this insight, is the private sector.
Who wants to go first?
Either one, Mr. Johnson?
I'll just go for a few minutes. Well, first of all, I think, when immigration has impacted the employment side dramatically. When you run an ad, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it be for a senior head of finance, whether it be for HR, whether it be for engineering, whether it be for quality, labor, general labor, there is primarily one ethnic personality showing up for all the jobs with regards to it. So I think at the end, and a lot of them are simply, don't have the skills with regards to it. So it's looking to find the key people, I think, in the sense of it. I would also add to the point of it that the taxation part that has plagued our company, like I'm in the process of expanding. I have my cost just in permits alone is 28% of my building cost to put up a facility. So if we had a different taxation process and another way to incentivize the development of people, and I think in help people learn skilled trades and apprenticeships with regards to it, we could develop people inside the system and inside the company. But you got to have the right people showing up at the job, and you have to have the incentive to be able to develop the people with regards to it.
Mr. Rizzo?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I'm an extremely passionate Canadian. That's why I'm here today. We invest and create our own apprenticeship programs and training programs. We take youth, we take people with little experience, and we do develop them internally. We identify whether or not they have skill sets. We have a promotion with an internal policy. So there's a lot of good things that can happen, but they take money, and they take the company to be in a really healthy position. And I do want to disagree with a couple of points, and they might not be as poignant as I heard them, but the government shouldn't be involved in creating jobs. The private sector needs to be creating jobs, right? The government is not efficient or effective. The private sector is the reason why we've been talking so passionately about the topic item today. It's the private sector that needs to be creating jobs, creating the innovation, creating the technology, and in our case, manufacturing. And the ratio is 7-to-1. For every job we create we influence 7 other jobs. We actually create another 7 jobs for every person that we hire, right? When we build a product, there's someone making the skids, there's someone making the boxes, there's someone making the screws and the fasteners, right? So, that's why manufacturing is so critical to China and to every economy in the world that wants to succeed. Manufacturing is a very important aspect of it. So to your point, how do we create jobs? Well, we allow companies, not administrative, not the government creating a new administration center, or we allow companies to create an environment to be rewarded to grow and succeed through lower taxes, lower impact costs, and a long-term strategy for development. With the trades,
Rizzo,
construction is...
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Madame Petrakis, the final round at 2.5 moments each. Mr. Janis for 2.5.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rizzo, I want to probe your comments about the link between the cost of living crisis and the unemployment crisis. You were talking earlier about how effectively, as the cost of living has gone through the roof, what constitutes a living wage, that is what your employees need in order to live in a city with incredibly expensive housing in order to cover basic expenses becomes a lot higher. So in other jurisdictions, workers that are making less money in a sort of nominal level, but are better off because of a lower cost of living, that becomes a much more competitive jurisdiction to invest in relative to Canada. And I think it's an important point because we've been talking about both of these crises, the cost of living crisis and the unemployment crisis, and you're highlighting the relationship between the two. I wonder if you could share a bit more about how the cost of living crisis impacts business investment, the ability to create more jobs, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's just every day. Our annual reviews come every December. We're very committed and loyal to our staff. Most of our employment is probably the tenure of like 25 years on average at our company. We have long-term committed employees, but it breaks, it's really hard for me. Like every year I want to give back to the employees. We want to try to compensate them. And, the conversations are just constantly the same. How expensive it is to live in Toronto, how expensive it is to live in Canada, to a point where good people that have been with me for 10, 15 years have started to identify that, can they move to one of our U.S. facilities, or could they transfer? And the reason they're doing that is they want to start a family, they want to have home ownership. It's just not feasible in Canada for most of the youth. So all these things are really big systemic problems. To put it in perspective, a facility in Georgia where we make components, the average person makes $16.50 to $17 US an hour, and a house price is $40,000 to $50,000, right? So to the employer, they can attract a lot of people. And, at this lower wages, those people can still live and acquire and do quite well. But in Canada, when most of your money is going to mortgage debt and living expenses and insurance and all the items I talked about before, the youth of today have no money left over to dream about that next step in their lives.
Thank you, Mr. Janice. Ms. Desrochers pour 2 minutes et 30.
OK, merci.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Desrochers. Thank you. I'm a little bit confused, I must say. It's true. I'm not saying that ironically, because we're here to talk about the unemployment rate amongst young people. That's our study. But we hear the witnesses talking about taxation, about programs. And Mr. Rizzo, you mentioned all of this. So what prevents you from doing what you want and need, given the programs that are at hand? I'm trying to go very, very quickly over this, but I think shortcuts are being taken with respect to living wages and affordability, because you really can't compare Mexico to Canada. There are programs to make life more affordable, like childcare, like dental plans, like pharmacare. So we have that.
I don't want to focus too much on that. I would really, because the colleague, Mr. Reynolds, raised the issue of trade skills, les métiers spécialisés, and I think it's a really important issue. Alors,
my question is to the two gentlemen. Maybe we could start with Mr. Rizzo. How can you help us answer the fact that young people don't want the jobs that we need? What can you do to help about that?
Well, look, I think it's our responsibility to create jobs that offer value to young people. And, in our case, manufacturing has a lot of challenges, but it has a lot of benefits. Our contracts go 5 to 8 to 10 years. So our ability to strategically plan and create long-term stability for people for their mortgages and long-term development for them is one of the benefits, I would say, to manufacturing. I think that the things that we can do, I personally invest like 8% of my income and profitability back in innovation and research and development. I'm funding multiple programs. I could hire 50 young engineers tomorrow, right? The problem is I'm funding this all out of my personal bank account. You know how much funding I've received from the government over 6 years of research and development funding on new innovations and technology? I received $480,000 through IRAP, and I haven't received any other funding. So when you invest, upwards of $15 to $20 million of your own personal money into projects to create jobs in Canada, and you see the government investing in foreign companies that are not Canadian-owned at $40 billion for plants that are owned by Volkswagen and Stellantis. These are not Canadian-owned companies, right? It's very disheartening that we are not prioritizing Canadian companies, looking at them and investing them in a way that they could create these jobs. I could easily create 300 jobs in Canada tomorrow, right?
Mr. Rizzo, we are running out of time. Madame Gill, pour 2 minutes et 30.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Mr. Paget wanted to answer the question, but I think that for Mr. Gagnon, if you could begin to talk about what we could do to get on the solution path for Canadian provinces and territories. What you know what's happening in Quebec. I'd be very happy to hear you speak to this. Yes. One of the great things that we can do in Quebec, and we can do even better, is to put a young person who is still studying in contact with a work area so that they could get some work experience. We have to wait, of course, until they're out of school, but they can start to understand what the skills are, what the skills needed are, what's involved in the labor market through apprenticeship programs and through internships. So when they do get out of school, they are far closer to understanding what is going on in the workspace, and they find jobs more quickly, and therefore the unemployment rate is lower. There are many people, young people, who get out of Cégep and who've been able to access co-op programs, even when they were studying. And there are skills programs that exist in Quebec that are short training programs that allow for a quick adaptability to the specific needs of each of the employers, those that have specific needs in their area of operation, rather than having big major programs that are very broad and general in nature that really don't meet the needs of the employers. So I think you could shorten training, and you could enhance the apprenticeship and internship, and then employers would get the employees they need. 10 seconds. No, that's all. Thank you, Chair. You gave me overtime earlier. Thank you.
That concludes this panel of witnesses on this study. The committee will meet again on Tuesday, October the 7th, to resume the study. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Adjourn. Thank you, witness.